Phylogeny. This is analyzing and interpreting data that explains patterns in evolution. Taxonomy is this nice field of biology that classifies and organizes living things into families. The domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species is the structural system where things are divided and then subdivided again, and how we have organized all living things. So we'll start from the top. Life is basically divided into three larger domains. Eubacteria are a domain that are considered true bacteria, like pathogens, things that cause disease, strep throat, that type of thing. Archaeobacteria are prokaryotes that live in extreme environments. They have a very specific metabolism, variety of colors. They live down in the depths of the ocean, in the mouths of volcanoes, at the rim of hot springs. And then we have eukarya, which is involved all eukaryotes, and we all know what a eukaryote is, right? Those are cells that have a membrane-bound nucleus. We can further subdivide those domains into kingdoms, and so there's an ongoing process here, and we'll learn more about it in ecology. As new evidence is found, we have a tendency to edit a lot of these things in here. So for instance, phylogeny is now included in helping us classify organisms. So Carlos Linnaeus, is the father of taxonomy. He created this two-name system of classifying species. We call that two-name system binomial nomenclature. It's always written in italics, and the first word is always capitalized. So the first word is the genus name, and then the second word is the species name. Like we are Homo sapiens, Homo is capitalized, but Homo sapiens, those two words are in italics. You can see here we have the brown bear on the left, and then of course the beautiful polar bear on the right. Ursus arctos is the brown bear, and Ursus maritimus, which is the polar bear. So these are both bears. They're part of the genus Ursus, but they each have their own individual species name because they are two different species. Phylogeny basically displays the evolutionary history of a species. So 3.5 billion years ago, approximately, was the first life form on Earth, and that was a prokaryote. And then 2.1 billion years ago, the first eukaryotes evolved, and this is through what we call endosymbiosis, where one prokaryote ended up inside of another one, and then both organisms were able to thrive. This endosymbiotic theory suggests that over time, coevolution of the two prokaryotes occurred, and then eventually led to the speciation of the first eukaryote. Thus, it is believed that all organisms share a common ancestor at some point, even billions of years ago, and phylogeny works to piece together evolutionary history of relatedness based on shared inherited characteristics. As students, you will need to know phylogenetic trees, how to read them. A phylogenetic tree is a diagram that's used to predict evolutionary relationships amongst groups of different organisms. The diagram branches at points that show where a new species has come from, it's diverged from. And so the branching points are representative of a common ancestor, which we don't always know who these are. We hypothesize that this relationship is based on shared characteristics. We analyze the morphology of organisms. Now we have genes. We can analyze the genes and, of course, how they behave. Evolutionary biologists stick through maximum parsimony. I don't remember. Yeah, maximum parsimony. Anyway, it just basically means that we're going to use the simplest explanation possible when we create these trees. The simplest explanation is often the closest that we know might be closest to being correct. But anyway, that's just what that word means. And that's just the general rule of phylogenetic trees, to keep them as simple as possible. So classifying organisms into their major taxa or groups is usually based on an evolutionary relationship. And so classifying groups of species in order at which they descended from a common ancestor, we use homologous features. The features between organisms let us know how closely related they are, when they could have inherited things. So any heritable trait, like a DNA proteins or anything that's anatomical structure, they are a result of divergent evolution, therefore showing us where the species first diverged. From a phylogenetic tree, we can learn which groups are most closely related, which ones are least related, and which ones diverged first. So for example, here we have a common ancestor, and we see this diverging group amongst moss, and then another common ancestor species. Pine and rose, because they, in this diagram, come together with a common ancestor, they're more closely related than pine and ferns are. So how do we read these phylogenetic trees? We start from the root. So the root, which is right over here, this is a common ancestor. This is the organism that from which all other species on this tree are going to evolve from. As you move away from the root, you are experiencing time. So it's time to go that way and time to go that way. Where we see this common ancestor and then we have another species that has evolved this way and then this way, we call this speciation. That's the branching off of this common ancestor, where two species have now evolved. Where the species line stops and nobody else is evolving from that particular species, we call that extinction. So that's the loss of one of those entire branches. But these continue on here. Each node represents, one more common ancestor and another common ancestor. And overall, the diagram is the oldest organisms that live in the past are down here. And the more we move in this direction, the more recent organisms that are showing up in the fossil record. So it's not that, this guy right here is not that he's extinct or anything, because he may not be. He is just older, and these guys are newer species. Phylogenetic trees do not show that species A evolved into species B, evolved into species C, and so forth. Like bacteria evolved from amoebas to insects to trouts to humans. They don't show this linear lineage, okay? Humans are not greater than trout or less than or whatnot either. It's not a linear fashion, and it's not showing who is the most advanced, because if that were to be true, then humans are not the newest species on the planet. It just shows where there are a branching system and a common ancestor. It's not a ladder that you're climbing up to get to something greater, and it's not a linear evolutionary path. From this phylogenetic tree, we can see that there was a common ancestor down here, and two species occurred. This common ancestor went through speciation, where one group, the New World monkeys, had formed, and then there were another group of organisms that were formed. The Old World monkeys, speciation occurred and created more different phyla of different types of apes in this diagram. We can see that chimpanzees and humans have a common ancestor, and then overall we are more closely related as a group to gorillas than monkeys and gorillas are. But we all share a common ancestor. But I must say that we can use this information in phylogenetic trees to predict the morphology in between groups and who's more closely related to who. But with DNA evidence now, we can actually sequence a lot of this stuff and find out who's got more genetic material in common.